Have you ever noticed how almost every single horror movie seems to naturally become a franchise in some way, or at least have some kind of sequel or prequel or eventually a remake? It's very, very difficult to find a horror film that just is completely 100% standalone and has never had any kind of continuation in any way, shape, or form. I was thinking about this because I thought about my top 10 favorite horror films of all time, and I realized within them, only one is truly a standalone, and the rest have all been sequelized or remade in some kind of way. So I thought it would be an interesting video topic to really sit down and think about it and try to come up with my top 10 favorite horror movies that have never had any kind of continuation and are distinctly standalone in their own way. So the rules for this list are essentially this. It has to be a standalone film. It cannot have a sequel. It cannot have a prequel. It cannot have a remake. It can't be a remake. It can't be part of a franchise. And it can't have some kind of television spin-off or come from a television show. So that is severely limiting the list. And so I was sitting down thinking about it. And there are dozens of movies that came to mind that I don't even think of as being part of a franchise or having sequels that I originally, like my first thought was like, oh, I'll put that on the list. For example, American Werewolf in London. I was like, that is a standalone film. There is no other American Werewolf in London. Then I remembered there's American Werewolf in Paris, which is technically a sequel. And I thought about The Shining, one of the greatest movies ever made, not just horror movies. But there was a TV version of The Shining, and there is also Doctor Sleep. And whether or not you want to consider the Doctor Sleep movie directly sequelizing the original Kubrick The Shining, it is the character Danny from The Shining as an adult and the continuation of his life and his story. And they even go back to the hotel, which is an exact recreation of The Shining. I love Doctor Sleep, by the way. Super underrated movie. You should check it out. But that means that The Shining also doesn't count. I was going to put the movie Martyrs on here, and then come to find out they've made a remake of Martyrs. So that one is out too. And one I was sure that I was going to be good with, and that I was really excited to talk about because I genuinely think it is one of the best zombie movies ever made, Train to Busan. It's a Korean zombie film that has a lot of carnage, a lot of heart, a lot of action, and I genuinely think this is a masterpiece film, not just of horror, but just in general, of movies in general. I think you should watch it. I had no idea about this, but apparently not only have they made a sequel, but there is also an animated prequel to Train to Busan. When did that come out? I have no idea. I've never seen any of those. I just think of it as a standalone movie. Anyway, there's other ones out there too, like Jaws. That's got 3 sequels. Or Psycho. That's got 3 sequels. So what the fuck am I going to do for this list? All right, I think I've come up with it. I don't think there's any loopholes. I researched this very briefly before I started the video, so I could be wrong, but I tried to look out for them. So here are legitimately 10 movies in the horror genre that have no sequels, prequels, remakes, or TV shows that I think are my favorite. So with Train to Busan gone, I had to reorganize my list. So I had my top 10. It was number 3. So everything got moved up a peg. So I had to come up with a number 10. And I thought about a movie called The Burning from the 1980s, which is a slasher movie that kind of goes along the same tropes as Friday the 13th or Sleepaway Camp. And it is based on a local urban legend that is an actual urban legend that is from New York State about these kids that pull a prank on somebody that works at a camp, end up burning him alive, and then he comes back for vengeance. And that's what this movie is all about. It is the legend of Cropsey. It's done very, very well. And it actually is, I remember when I was making my Friday the 13th retrospective, it actually, shockingly, is not really a ripoff of Friday the 13th, because both Friday the 13th and The Burning were conceptualized and they were filming around the same time. So it actually seems like it's a ripoff, but it really was its own thing. It just, the timing of those two movies coming out around the same time is just one of those natural coincidences that happens in movies sometimes. My number 9 pick is going to be the movie Cabin in the Woods, which is a horror comedy, and there's a couple of those on this list, but It actually, even though it is not a sequel or remake of any horror movie that you've seen, this movie directly plays on the tropes and cliches of horror movies in themselves. So it very much kind of relies on your knowledge of horror movies in order for it to work. I feel like this movie has been talked about and discussed enough that it's okay to spoil it, but if you have a chance to go into this movie blind without ever having seen it, which I think is the best way to experience this movie, particularly if you have knowledge of horror films like Evil Dead or Friday the 13th, I think you will get a genuine kick out of this movie because it's a ton of fun. But essentially what you have is this a cliche scenario of a bunch of kids going to a cabin in the woods to party. We've seen that a million times, but something else is happening beneath the surface. And what you come to find out is that all of these horror kind of cliches or killers or zombies or whatever it is all part of a larger kind of ritual in order to keep things in check. And I think the movie does a really good job both being kind of a parody, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but also really delivering on the scares. And if you've ever wanted to see someone get killed by a unicorn in a very graphic way, it'll give you that. At number 9, I'm actually going to put In the Mouth of Madness, which is a John Carpenter film that I rewatched for the first time in forever the other weekend because I was doing a ranking of every single John Carpenter movie, and I think this one is really, really good. Like, this is a legitimately great horror film that just continues to unfold as it goes on, and you're never quite sure exactly what is happening. Sam Neill, who will show up again on this list, is this insurance investigator and the author of all these horror novels, kind of like a Stephen King-ish character, goes missing. And so Sam Neill's character goes to look for him and slowly starts to discover that all of the things that he wrote in his book start to become real, or maybe were real from the beginning, but things just start getting weirder and weirder. And because the books themselves have a lot of variety, you get a lot of variety in the horror. You get monsters, you get weird possessed people, you get, attack dogs, you get like all of these kind of different things all kind of merged together while this character is trying to figure out like what's real, what's not real, what is going on, how is this happening. And it's just a really, really fun movie that maybe doesn't get talked about enough anymore, but definitely deserves a spot on the list. At my number 7 spot, I'm going to put a movie called Cemetery Man. I don't really know how to describe this. Is it a horror movie? I have no idea. It has a lot of horror shit in it. It's got people rising from the dead. It's got zombies. It's got the Grim Reaper.
If you don't want the dead coming back to life, why don't you just kill the living?
I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of gore. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of sex. It's kind of a horror movie, but it's just this... How do I describe this movie? Okay, so... It is a Italian film, I think, and the lead character is this caretaker of the cemetery. And it's a cemetery where whenever somebody is buried in it, they rise up from the dead, basically become a zombie, and so he has to go around and kill all of the recently deceased people that come back. But I wouldn't even go so far as to say this is a zombie movie, because that's just his job. That's not like the main focus of the movie. Like, it kind of is, but it's just sort of like a matter of fact. Like, people rise from the dead, this guy goes and kills them every night. It's just his job. All right. The story gets started when this like drop dead gorgeous girl shows up and her husband just died, but the cemetery man falls in love with her. They start banging on the dead husband's grave, which that's just bad karma to begin with. She ends up dying. It's just, there's so much going on. He also has his friend caretaker, which is like this mentally slow character who also falls in love with a girl that dies, and she's decapitated, but her severed head is still alive. And at some point, he just starts going mad because of all the shit that he has to deal with constantly. There's one girl that wants to hook up with him, but she's a little bit intimidated by boners, so he goes to get his dick chopped off. It's a really good movie. I think you should watch it.
Put that out immediately! Smoking is not allowed in here!
All right, my number 6 pick is going to be a movie called The Sacrament, which is actually directed by Ty West, who is pretty famous right now with the X trilogy. There was X and Pearl, and Maxine comes out pretty soon. But before that, he made 2 other original horror movies that would both count for the list. There's House of the Devil and The Sacrament. But I'm going to pick The Sacrament because I think how much I love this movie is a testament to how good it is, because it's in a genre that I don't particularly care for, and that's kind of the found footage genre. Or I guess that's not a genre, that's more of like a artistic style. But anyways, I'm not a big fan of found footage movies. There's a few out there I like, but The Sacrament is one that I think stands above the rest. Most particularly because the found footage style is still filmed mostly like a movie. Like, the shots are very deliberately set up. There's not a lot of shaky cam. You really get a good sense of space, and you kind of understand what is happening. A big problem with found footage films that I have is just because of how sloppy they are, you know, and that's just not saying the movies are filmed sloppily, but that's just the nature of the trope. It's just like the camera's shaking, people are running, the camera's too close up on people. It just annoys me. But The Sacrament doesn't really do any of that. And it's basically about a guy that's making a documentary where his sister is living with this kind of cult, or they're very peaceful people that live out in the middle of nowhere, and they do things their own way, and they have their own village or whatever. So he's going out there to reconnect with her, also make this little documentary about it, and it just becomes more terrifying as time goes on, erupting into like a extremely like bizarre and chaotic final act of the movie. There's one scene in it particularly that always gives me chills, because he goes there and everybody seems happy. Everyone seems like they enjoy what's going on. They're away from society. They have their own society set up. They have one leader of the village that they kind of praise and put up on a pedestal, and they're having, they dance and sing, and everything seems nice. And then there's one moment where this little girl comes up and hands one of the main characters a piece of paper, and he opens it up and it just says like, "Help us," or something. And it's just like, that moment always sends chills down my spine. Great movie. And I think it's very underrated. I don't ever hear anybody talk about it. Maybe I'm the only person that likes it. I don't know, but I love that movie. My number 5 is also a movie that I will stand on the hill for forever, because I love it so goddamn much, and that is The Faculty. It is a movie directed by Robert Rodriguez that came out in the 90s, and it is a very 90s movie, but in the best possible way. It is essentially takes place within a high school, and the cast of characters is outstanding. You have Josh Hartnett in one of his first roles. You got Elijah Wood. You got Clea Duvall. I always love when she pops up in anything. And you got Jordana Brewster, which, by the way, Jordana Brewster in this movie, I just have had a crush on forever. The bus scene, I can't even. Stood together. Anyways, regardless, every character is kind of like a stereotype of high school. Like, you have like the, Josh Hartnett's character is like selling drugs on the side, and also flirting with teachers. Elijah Wood is the nerd. You got the goth girl, you got the preppy girl, you got the jock. You got all of these kind of standard trope characters that all wind up having to come together because their school is being infected by aliens that are taking over the bodies of the staff and also the students. So it's kind of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So they have to figure out who's an alien, who's not an alien, how to fight against this threat. And I've just always loved this movie. Maybe it's like the time period it came out, but I've always had so much fun with this film. I think it's a great little horror sci-fi masterpiece that kind of came out, and some people still talk about it. Some people still like it, but it's kind of like fell to the wayside, and that's a shame because it's fantastic. At my number 4 spot is going to be Trick or Treat, which is a anthology film that takes place on Halloween night, and it is multiple different stories that all kind of intertwined with one another, and just these horrific things happen with this sort of ominous Halloween figure named Sam, who is present at all these events. And what I really do enjoy about this movie is that it kind of looks at Halloween through the lens of various different ages of what you would be doing on Halloween. Like, there's a story about the kids, right? And they're out trick-or-treating, and they're in costumes, and they're trying to scare each other. And then there's a story about the girls that are going out to party. So you get older, you wear like the sluttier costumes, you're looking to drink and hook up and all that kind of stuff. And there's another story with an old man who is kind of like the Ebenezer Scrooge of Halloween, where he's just like, fuck this shit, fuck these kids, I don't want to bother with it, like I'm just old and grumpy, I'm too old for Halloween, yada yada. So there's like all of these different kinds of stories, all taking place on Halloween night. I love how they all link up together. I think this movie is a ton of fun. There's things that happen in this that you don't even expect to happen. Like at one point, werewolves just show up, and you're just like, okay, I'm down with this. Let's go. There's serial killers. There's monsters. There's all kinds of things. There's zombie kids. It's just fun for the whole family. I love it. My number 3 pick is going to be the next movie with Sam Neill, and this one is called Possession from 1981. I actually watched this movie for the first time last year, thanks to recommendations from you guys, and I had no idea what to expect with this one. I don't even know how to describe it. Sam Neill plays a character that comes back home, and his wife, she decides that she wants to leave him, and she divorces him, and he just has no idea what's going on or why this happened. And so he tries to figure it out. He starts kind of like mentally deteriorating as this is happening. And you're wondering, how is this a horror film? Well, there's also like an antichrist abortion. Within his discovery of trying to figure out why his wife left him and seeing exactly what she is up to at the moment, things just get stranger and stranger. And you really don't expect any of it. It very much just comes out of nowhere. But sometimes that is the best way to do a horror movie, where you are invested in these characters and the drama that is happening, so you're already on board with the premise of the film in general. And then, about maybe a halfway through the movie, it introduces this intense horror element that kind of comes out of nowhere, but at the same time makes perfect sense, and it just becomes more and more disturbing. So you're already disoriented, you're already confused, there's already a lot of high tension and high emotion because you're dealing with this separation of this couple, but then you introduce a demonic element in the middle of the movie, and everything becomes 10 times more fucked up. Also, like the abortion sequence, or I guess I should say miscarriage sequence. I don't know what you want to call it. Some people may say it's over the top. They're correct, but it's awesome. And this is the kind of stuff I love to see in movies. Is that weird? I should probably take a look at myself. Anyways, it's a great movie. We're going to switch gears entirely with my number 2 pick, whereas Possession is kind of like deep and dramatic and a lot of heavy emotion going on. My number 2 pick is a movie called Dead Alive, or Brain Dead, depending on where in the world you are. It's got different titles. This is a Peter Jackson movie. Long before he made the Lord of the Rings films, he was making movies about priests that kick ass for the Lord.
I kick ass for the Lord!
This is another one of those movies where I'm like, is it a zombie movie? I mean, I guess technically, but things get a lot more crazy than that. Actually, you could even argue maybe this is not a standalone movie, because the beginning of the movie takes place on Skull Island, which is technically the same island where King Kong takes place at, and Peter Jackson eventually made a King Kong movie. So maybe this takes place in the King Kong universe. I don't know. But what they find is this infected rat monkey that bites the mother of our main character, Lionel. She becomes a zombie creature and just slowly starts infecting pretty much the entire town. This is one of the goriest movies I've ever seen in my life, and for all the best reasons. It is a movie where somebody chooses a lawnmower as his primary weapon. It has martial arts priests. It has zombie babies. It has more like disgusting body mutilation, decapitation, blood spray that you will ever see. And because of this movie and a couple of other of his early films, look, I know the Lord of the Rings are great, but I think Dead Alive is Peter Jackson's best movie. And now we're going to switch gears entirely once again and get deeply, deeply serious, because my number 1 pick, and this is the only film in my top 10 horror films that is a standalone, and that is Hereditary. Now, I know Hereditary is kind of debated between people. Like, some people really love it, some people really hate it and think it's overrated. I am on the side of loving it. Mostly because, similar to Possession, I was very deeply invested in the storyline of the characters before the horror even starts. So this is technically like a demonic possession movie, like genre that you would call it. So actually kind of the same genre as Possession. And it's about a grieving family and a grieving mother losing her daughter and what she goes through, and like how, you know, guilt kind of seeps through every member of the family, that they're all guilty on some different level, and how you deal with loss and how you deal with pain, and you know, the regret of what happened and the lengths that you will go to try to fix it. But you know, unbeknownst to most of the characters, every aspect of it is being heavily manipulated behind the scenes. And that also makes this movie really good for rewatches, because when you go back and rewatch it again, you see all the little clues of all the demonic shit from the very beginning that you wouldn't notice the first time around, because the first time around you're just watching a family deal with the loss of a child, and it's devastating. And about halfway through, they introduce that horror, that kind of supernatural element, that, hey, you can connect with the dead if you do this ritual. You might be able to talk to your daughter again. You might be able to fix something here. And so, you know, you see kind of like the desperation of the mother. And Toni Collette in this movie, like, I think she deserved an Oscar, man. Like, I know horror movies are not very respected at the Oscars most of the time, but not only do I think she should have been nominated, I think she should have won that year. I don't even know who else was nominated that year. I forgot. But she's just incredible. Like, her performance in this movie is literally Oscar worthy. It's so good. It has some of the creepiest imagery that I've seen in a movie in a long time. I also made the mistake of watching this movie for the first time at like 11 p.m., which by myself, so that wasn't a good idea. And the things that creep me the most out about in horror movies are just like that lingering sense of like dread that comes with the atmosphere. It's not the jump scare, it's not the slasher, it's like when you look down that hallway and you just see like 5 naked people staring at you for no reason. Like, I didn't want to go out of my room and go to the bathroom because there might be naked people staring at me. You know, usually I'm the naked one in my house staring out the window, but this could be opposite. I don't know. All I'm saying is that Hereditary absolutely works for me. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's one of the best, more recent horror movies that we've had, and it is my #1 standalone horror movie. So there you guys go. That is my list. There's a lot more movies I would have loved to put on the list, but I come to find out they actually have sequels and remakes, so they were not allowed. So you can go ahead and put your list down below, but the rules are no sequels, no prequels, no remakes, no television series. So have at it. So if you have another horror movie that is completely standalone by itself, never had any continuation, put your favorites down below. Tell me what you think of my list. Whether you love it or hate it, that's fine. So thanks for watching, guys. I do appreciate it. Give the video a thumbs up and a comment to help it out in the algorithm. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll talk to you next time.